Welcome to Reporter's Notebook, where we talk to the Washington Examiner's top journalists about the stories breaking on their beats. I'm Jim Antle. I'm joined today by defense reporter Mike Brest. Mike, all the service branches are trying to get everyone vaccinated, despite some resistance to this, although there's been fairly overwhelming compliance as well. Talk a little bit about where we are right now in terms of the vaccine mandates at the various service branches.
So the first thing is that only one branch has had their deadline for active duty come up, and that's the Air Force. It was November 2nd, and so at the time they said about 97% of active personnel were vaccinated. It has risen a little bit since then. Obviously, when we're talking about roughly 3%, you can't get that high. But we're still talking about 10,000 airmen, and to date they haven't approved any religious exemptions. But we see through the numbers and the data that they provide that there are about 5,000 requests for religious exemptions that are sort of in the process, and the Air Force has up to 30 days to sort those out and give an answer. And so we're about halfway through that timeline. So they have about 2 weeks to figure out whether or not these people should be approved and how that'll play out. And then we look to other service branches. Both the Navy as well as the Marines have their deadline coming up at the end of the month. And so we see that each of the branches have, we're talking really high percentages of vaccinations. We're talking, 90+% for each branch.
Right.
So as we get down to the final days, it's really these holdouts that haven't been vaccinated that are maybe against it or don't want to.
Right.
And are trying to seek how they can either get an exemption or figure out sort of what they plan on doing.
Now, there haven't been many or any religious exemptions granted at this point, as far as we know, right?
Yeah, as far as we've been told.
But there has been some resistance to getting inoculated, and there have been lawsuits by members of the service branches challenging the legitimacy of these vaccine mandates.
Yeah, so earlier this week there was a lawsuit that was filed, and the lawyer was representing roughly 40 Navy SEALs, or people within the Navy. About 2/3 of them were Navy SEALs. And these were individuals who, according to the suit, say they have their religious beliefs prevent them from getting the vaccine. And now this lawsuit isn't contending that the entire mandate should be thrown out, but just that their religious objections should be upheld.
To the COVID-19
Exactly. One interesting part that wasn't mentioned in either the lawsuit or in my conversations with the lawyer is that it's unclear of these individuals whether or not they have previously been approved for the other vaccines that are required for military service.
Now, we had some troubling reports coming out of the service branches this week. We had some concern about how the military in general is handling sexual harassment and sexual assault investigations. What did we learn about that?
Yeah, so there was a DOD Inspector General report that came out this week that found that for the most part the military is not doing what is required of them by law in cases of sexual misconduct, sexual assault, or things that even fall into workplace behavior, such as workplace harassment or hazing. And so each branch is doing it differently, but the overarching reports found is that the people who are investigating these alleged crimes or these incidents were not specialized, and they did not have the specialized training that is required for them.
Now, the Air Force had its own separate report where it looked at some workplace and other interpersonal interactions among Air Force personnel, and they also had some fairly troubling results.
Yeah, and so this was a separate report, but it also found that a good percentage of people who are working there are actually, have reported inappropriate behavior in the workforce. And so this is not external. This is not about their personal lives. This is specifically about sort of their work in the building. And so between these two reports, it paints a pretty startling picture for the culture of working in the Air Force.
Which at least since the 90s, there's been a lot of concern about how people, particularly men and women, but not exclusively men and women, have interacted while working in the military with one another. So, go ahead.
So it'll be interesting to see in each of these reports the investigators call for various suggestions or recommendations about how things can be improved, but it'll be only time will tell to see if leaders will take these suggestions under advisement and if things will change.
Right, and take these things more seriously,
Yeah.
perhaps. So we've been talking in recent weeks about this Chinese hypersonic missile, which they, of course, deny that
Yes.
they've tested, but we have intelligence that
Yes.
suggests that they have. The U.S. has been experimenting with ways to defend against this, because at the moment we don't really have an adequate defense if they were to launch a hypersonic missile. What sort of patterned after the Israeli Iron Dome? What sort of things have gone on?
Yeah, so it's been reported in recent days and weeks that the U.S. is actually has created their own version of the Iron Dome, and they're using it in Guam to simulate what it would be like if a Chinese missile were to attack, if there were strikes from China. And so the interesting thing about this is it's not quite the same as the Israeli Iron Dome, because when you think about that, they're taking rockets, and the Iron Dome is intercepting rockets from generally Gaza. So we're talking a very small radius. Whereas whether it's Guam or should the U.S. ever be attacked by China, it's not quite the same as it being right across the fence. And so that's something that they're working to. And the other thing is that the Iron Dome at this point wouldn't actually protect from hypersonic missiles. And so they're trying to figure out not how to stop both hypersonic missiles, but ballistic missiles or other types of attacks from China. And that's really what this testing is in reference to.
Now, our military leaders have been careful to say this isn't quite a Sputnik moment,
Correct.
But they're pretty concerned about this.
Yeah, when you look at both the comments from the Joint Chief of Staff General Mark Milley, as well as the number two, his outgoing Vice Chair General John Hyten, both of them have talked about how this moment, while it's not sort of the revolutionary moment of the Sputnik moment, this is a big deal, and it shows it gives us insight into what China's doing and how they're growing and their capabilities. And so while DoD in particular has been pretty tight-lipped about the specific testing, they've been very adamant throughout the entire administration that China is the #1 pacing challenge, as they say.
Right.
So it's up to the U.S., who has fallen behind, according to many experts in this field, to restart and to reinvigorate this process.
And so, this is all happening at a time where they're trying to avoid sort of a Cold War type posture toward China, but China has emerged as
an adversary.
They're certainly, at best, a frenemy at this point.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mike. You can read Mike and the rest of the Washington Examiner's national security team at washingtonexaminer.com.